So one of the things that has broken recently, this is from the iPaper again, and it tells you a lot when even the left-wing outlets such as the iPaper seemingly, it says impartial news and intelligent debate. I'm not really too sure about that. And an opinion piece by Elliot Wilson, even they have come out now and said that Angela Rayner has proved it. Labour is no better than the Tories. And when she was quick to demand that heads should roll when she was in the opposition, even now they are demanding that it's her turn. So Angela Rayner has been caught, I believe it's on her second or third property, not paying stamp duty. Not paying stamp duty. Having successfully fended off allegations last year about the sale of her council house in 2015, she should have prepared to explain any similar complications in the future and treated the whole issue with extreme caution. Rayner now admits she did not seek to minimise the stamp duty on her newly acquired property in Hove. I believe that's the one now that she paid, what, $800,000 for? And Angela Rayner, somebody that left school at 16 and pregnant, not making any judgments about that whatsoever, because obviously we have a demographic crisis in this. We have a demographic crisis in this country anyway. So, not making any points about that. But somebody who's now managed to get into through the unions, through Unison, etc., get into this position as deputy MP. But as far as I know, she doesn't exactly have much in terms of qualification to her name. Makes you think, not necessarily what you do, it's who you know, right? But on a property which I believe she's now paid, somewhere in the realm of about $800,000 for? Right, so this is the thing. Your MPs, your deputy prime ministers, whatever it's your prime ministers, they get about 5 or 6 residences, all the lovely cars, all the lovely dinners, meeting all the world leaders, what is it? Or what's the... Oh, I don't know. I've forgotten the term to use when it, like rubbing elbows together with the elite or whatever. If you know the term I'm on about, please leave it down in the comments. Chin-chinning with the right people or whatever. All the while, they get all the tax cuts. Donald Trump made waves in his first presidential election when he outright blew Hillary out of the water by saying, yeah, I do all the same things, but Hillary does, and she's not going to do it because her donors get the same benefits that I do. Be like, yeah, I take advantage of the system. I game the system, but so does everybody else, right? That honesty is something people really appreciated. But honesty is something you're not going to get out of the Labour government unless, again, they're saying that they want digital ID, but even then, they're not saying what they want it for. They wanted to control the native populace, not to control the barbarians they've let in through the gates. But she did underpay the stamp duty substantially. She says that she was not trying to dodge tax and simply followed legal advice. She said in a statement, I have now been advised that although I did not own any other property at the time of the purchase, the application of complex deeming provisions which relate to my son's trust give rise to additional stamp duty liabilities. Again, very, very convenient. Very, very convenient. But this all goes to the point, ladies and gentlemen, she even had to refer herself, or she chose to refer herself to the Prime Minister's ethics advisor to judge whether she has acted improperly. Her defence being she followed legal advice, paid what she thought she was liable to pay, and did not clarify any of the questions raised by the media because of the court order in place. So Angela Rayner, one of the biggest ones, as I said, when she was in opposition, calling for people to resign, literally saying, there's one video I will show you here, ladies and gentlemen. Here's the video in question, where she's on stage somewhere, I believe it's at the annual gathering in Brighton. It's only a short clip, ladies and gentlemen. But Angela herself explaining there's one rule for us and one rule for all of them. Here is the immortal clip, ladies and gentlemen, where again, there's always a post calling for the resignation of one of the opposition for something which they've supposedly done that's sleuthy corruption, right? Saying that it's one rule for us and it's one rule for them. They get away with everything, right? There's all the tweets that everybody's been sharing all over X. If you go on X, you can't help but see these tweets that people, or posts rather, that they've shared from Angela Rayner's past. Here is the clip in question, the immortal line where it says, one rule for us and one rule for them. Coming on screen now.
That there's one rule for them and one rule for all of us.
Now, I'm not going to take the low-hanging fruit at the end of that clip. I'm just going to leave it be. I was half expecting her to go along the... I'm not going to leave it be, actually. I was half expecting her to go on along the thuckatash line on that last bit. But again, this is the thing. When it comes to these people, quite literally now, it is indeed one rule for them and one rule for all of us. That's one thing you can say that Angela Rayner is actually right about in this instance. However, she's now on the receiving end of her own sword that she spent no end of time, and no end of glee. Swinging around when she was in the opposition, when she felt that she had the moral high ground or whatever. Not so nice now, is it, Ange? Not so nice now. Speaking of not so nice, that was something that our next sort of person to talk about, person of interest, said. She said some not very nice things about her constituents, which I do believe if you were a resident of Stourbridge, then you should take this and always remember it when anything else happens with your member of parliament, now with your elected representative, right? When any crocodile tears come in the future, when any, anything happens with this, what is likely to come in the future in terms of potential revolution, even violent or otherwise, right? Not endorsing, that whatsoever. Endorsing the revolution idea, not necessarily endorsing violent revolution and people getting hurt and stuff like that, right? However, on the back of, again, we had the Guardian article, I think it was 1 or 2 episodes ago, saying about the group that were telling the right-wingers to stop linking immigration and sexual violence together, telling the victims of sexual violence to shut up for the sake of diversity, essentially. You had other right-wing women then coming out and saying, like, no, you guys would be the first to call out and say that if you got catcalled by a regular British person, you'd be the first to say it was like a crime against humanity, all right? But then when it's actual children and women all the time getting raped by foreigners, you don't want to say anything, and you don't want to link it to immigration because obviously you don't want your precious narrative to fall apart. Labour MP, was it Kat Eccles? Is that her name? Kat Eccles or Kat Eccles? I'm not exactly sure how to say it. We'll go with Kat Eccles. Actually, no, Eclairs are quite nice. We can't associate it with Eclairs. That's too nice. We'll go with Kat Eccles. Yeah, we'll go with Kat Eccles. Labour MP claims, quote, degenerate native men are the biggest threat to women in Britain. There's an immortal post. That came off the back of her actually lying about Nigel Farage's remarks. I don't like defending Nigel Farage, but this somebody does actually need to be defended on. Is that he said to do with the what was it? It was the recent Epping ruling, sorry. That the ECHR was involved, and people were trying to say, no, ECHR had nothing to do with it. How can he peddle this nonsense? And literally the receipt was posted on one of my, one of the accounts that I follow, saying, no, it actually was. It was posted. It was to do with the ECHR, which I'll actually pull up the extract for you now, ladies and gentlemen, if I could find it, because I actually quote posted Kat. She said, lies, and more damn lies. How is he able to spread this nonsense, or how is he allowed to spread this nonsense? The judgment explicitly stated that ECHR was not considered in the ruling. And Nigel Farage said, the government has used ECHR against the people of Epping. Illegal migrants have more rights under the British than the British under Starmer, which he's absolutely right about. Kat Eccles is completely lying, because this is an extract that somebody posted for me from said ruling on Epping. I'll read it out, but I'll also put it on screen for you, ladies and gentlemen. If you have a look in the box on the screen now, you'll see it coming up. It says, the written arguments on behalf of the Home Secretary in this appeal included the contention that, quote, the relevant public interests in play are not equal. This is exactly what Justice Bean said, by the way. And that one aspect of this is the Home Secretary's statutory duty is a manifestation of the UK's obligations under Article 3 of the European Convention on Human Rights, also known as the ECHR. This point was not pursued in oral argument. Any argument in this particular context about hierarchy of rights is, in our view, unattractive. So literally saying that, yes, it was to do with the UK's quote-unquote obligations under the ECHR, outright proving that Ms. Eccles here is a liar, is indeed a liar. But then obviously she had to double down on that when she said that these degenerates shouldn't be coming across on the small boats. They shouldn't be allowed to stay in this country. And then she clapped back with one of her commenters saying that native men or native degenerate men are the biggest threat to women. Again, the native degenerate men are the people that she would call degenerate, would be the people that would actually step up to defend the women, right? If feminist sensibilities would not allow men to be praised for anything, so if men did anything good, especially if it was defending women or a woman from one of these attacks, as many men have actually died in many countries trying to do. There's one famous instance, I've forgotten the gentleman's name, but he actually tried to intervene as a lady was getting raped by a foreigner, and I believe he got stabbed to death because of it. A young boy, probably around, I think he was around my age, maybe a little bit younger. I think he's in his early 20s, somewhere in Europe, in one of the European countries. It might have been Germany or France, if I'm not mistaken, or Austria. It's one of those countries. Those are the people that she's calling degenerate. Those are the people that she's calling degenerate, right? And we know that there is indeed a link between immigration and sexual violence. We know that. We know that, especially when you look at the cultures that a lot of these people are coming from. And now we've brought them in such a number that there was no need for them ever to integrate into our system. They can just bring them over here. That's why the rape gangs are an imported problem. The rape gangs are an imported problem, and they've been here ever since the 1950s. They've been here. So, completely imported problem. And the large increase in sexual violence has been an imported problem. For us, quite literally, again, importing the problem from backwards cultures that indeed do have very caveman, misogynistic views of women, right? The minute you go out there and you see the differences between men and women loud and clear. In many ways, it's testament to how much the West has made in terms of progress that we can now be in a position where we're actually confused about what men and women are and confused about the differences between men and women. You go out to those places, you see it stark as day, right? You see it clear as day. But she claimed that, again, degenerate native men are the biggest threat to women after a series of reports came to light revealing the scale of crimes committed by foreigners in Britain, which we've talked about time and time again. Kat Eccles, MP for Stourbridge, made the claim after accusing Reform UK leader Nigel Farage about lying in the Epping High Court ruling. The person said, "You betray your own girls to be raped by degenerates, shame on you." And she said, degenerate native men are the biggest threat to women. This is the lady in question. This is Miss Eccles, and it should tell you everything you need to know. So it's the one that said it's degenerate native men that are the biggest threat to Britain. And assuming, because we do have a large number of degenerate men, let's make no mistake about it, because our own trends with regards to sexual violence have been going up by, I think, about 40%, right? They've been rising. Sexual violence cases, I believe it was sexual violence or sexual assault cases that were committed by British people had been going up at a rate of 40% over the last year, I believe it was, in an article we talked about before. So we do have serious problems, make no mistake about it, but that's about half of what it was for the foreign-born population. So let's not pretend that there's any equivalency, but if there was actually equivalency, then yeah, you would actually say that, because there's a lot more still at the moment. It's rapidly changing, but there's a lot more native than non-native people. So you would expect that. That's why I always say, ladies and gentlemen, that the argument that most murderers or most thieves or whatever are white people or British people, when they try to deflect from the systematic nature of grooming gangs and stuff like that, for example, I'm like, yeah, but in a nation where you do have one particular part of the population with joint characteristics or whatever that is in the majority still, right? You would actually expect them to be committing more of the crimes. It's then when you look in an area and you see that 2/3 of a certain crime, a very heinous crime, child sexual abuse and exploitation, have been committed by a specific population, right? Pakistani Muslims in particular, and they make up only about 3 to 4% of the population. That's when you see a serious problem with a minority in your community, right? And that would not be expected. If everything else was equal, we were all thinking the same and doing the same whatever, you would expect, again, a population with 70% demographic makeup to be responsible for 70% of a certain crime, right? But that's not what you see. It's what you see out in America, where, again, sadly, it's a sad truth, the black population out there is massively overrepresented versus the population in violent crime stats, like murder and stuff like that. In many instances, it's very sad. It's because they're murdering each other in gang violence over drugs and whatever else, right? Territory, women, prostitution, whatever it may be. It depends on what area you look at and what other things that are going on in that area, where there's a lot of gangs and stuff like that, because it's a single mother from the from the projects culture out there. And the sad thing is they take pride in that, and they end up going further and further down this, especially when you have the families going from about, I think it was like the single motherhood rate in the 60s in America was in about like 20-30%. And now it's at like 80%, 70-80%. And this is the thing, fathers are a non-negotiable. Fathers are non-negotiable. That's why we should be absolutely rallying against things like same-sex adoption and IVF for the purpose of same-sex couples having kids, right? Should absolutely be rallying against it, because mother and father, natural mother and father, are absolutely essential to a child's development. And this irrefutable now. It's irrefutable, and we've done a great evil by distorting that. We've done a great evil and put kids through a great evil unfairly by distorting that. She then went on to say, "It's cute how excited the native men have gotten over me using their own language back at them." And then she deleted the post. That tells you a lot about the principles and what she said, right? But obviously the internet is forever, right? Somebody said, Robert Bates, research director at the Center for Migration Control, issued a warning over her remarks. "This is an incredibly reckless comment that is based on nothing more than Eccles' own prejudice and dogma. We know that, on a per capita basis, foreign nationals are more likely to be convicted of sexual offences than Britons, with some nationalities up to 20 times more likely." Now, convicted is a key word there again, ladies and gentlemen, because somebody can commit the crime and not be convicted. But in the status of the justice system that we have, where again they'll let Rotherham rape gang leaders off with no sentence whatsoever to be put in a multi-six-figure council house, right, with a brand new car and everything like that. They'll let him go free because of his religion and his race, and then they'll lock up people like Lucy Connolly and Wayne O'Rourke and people like that for things that they say on social media for years at a time. So we could say then, oh well, maybe the conviction is, maybe the courts are racist against the minorities or whatever, the foreigners. Well, no, actually the courts, if you look at the data and how things manifest in terms of sentence and everything like that, are rigged the opposite way, and they're still 20 times more likely. That tells you a lot. That tells you a lot, doesn't it? That the problem now is completely undeniable. But these are your elected representatives, ladies and gentlemen. I urge you to remember this next time, ladies and gentlemen, that election season comes around and this person comes back grovelling for your votes. If you either live in Stourbridge or you know people that live in Stourbridge, right, in those constituencies, please do send them this part of the video. Please do send them the link to this video and say, watch from whatever timestamp it is onwards. You'll find it down. You'll find the chapters down in the show notes, ladies and gentlemen. Make sure they know, especially if they're just a regular man, right, trying to provide for his family, do work, etc. Make sure that they know exactly what their quote-unquote elected representatives thinks of them. If you enjoyed that clip, then make sure to go on over to the Voice of the Valleys X page at VOT_Valleys on X. We're also on Instagram at Voice of the Valleys. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, comment, all of that good stuff. Thank you so much, and we'll see you again soon. Godspeed.